When you play through the Division 2, do you ever wonder, what is behind this random door in my way? Or what is behind this annoyingly placed barrier? Have you ever thought to yourself that it would actually be pretty cool if missions did not just kind of feel like the same boring mess for the last 4 years? And that leads me to ask, should missions actually feel fun? Should they feel different? And should they be challenging every time you run through them? Okay, now, that might be a huge stretch for what the Division can actually reasonably accomplish, but then again, maybe it's not really a stretch at all. I mean, the teams working on the Division have all kinds of tricks up their sleeve. I mean, they do. I mean, we've seen them used to basically create the modes and the manhunts. I mean, like the random generation stuff. And, going back to things like Underground. I mean, they've had this ability to connect the dots in terms of pieces of a map for, their franchise. I mean, it's basically one of the things that they've, continually done. And yet, when it comes to regular missions, which are still some of the most played content in the game, almost nothing happens to drive up player excitement. And in this video, I want to actually explore the Division's chronic issue with content and how features, currently limited only to game modes, could hold the key to unlocking the Division's true potential. Now, it might be difficult to add up all the time you spend playing any one specific form of content in the Division. For me, if I was to actually try to generalize, I would say besides inventory management and tinkering with builds, the thing I have done the most is basically run missions. Yeah, it's kind of a simple answer, but I find it to be pretty accurate, and I would be willing to bet most players fall into this category. Now, that's not to say that I like missions the most or that I didn't run a large amount of skirmish back in the day. It just happens that missions are the bread and butter of the Division franchise. It is the story of the game. It is the heart of season manhunts, and it was basically the backbone of endgame content, that is, until Summit and Countdown and, of course, Descent mode coming here soon, created something else to do at the endgame. And yet, after 4 years of this same unchanging content, players continue to play the missions and test builds on the missions. I would even say, apart from maybe Countdown, there really isn't anything easier to matchmake for. And yet, just like with Division 1, they are continually ignored and never given a bigger or better reason to actually be played. It leads me into some other questions, like why are missions such neglected content? Why waste time on boring and often tedious modes when old content could be revived in new and fresh ways? I mean, why put half-hearted effort into new systems when you could add twice the content by making everything already here far more interesting? So in this video, I want to talk about one of my many grievances with the Division franchise. Why can poorly made modes get random event generation and different level pathing options, but the main sources of content are left to the abyss with features that are not improved in over 4 years? So let's dive into something I think has been ignored by the franchise for far too long: the need for a complete mission revamp. Now, I want to use the District Union Arena as my example for this, and just so we are all on the same page, because I don't really think many players have a true awareness of mission layout. A lot of times, you go into the mission and you just kind of run through it without really thinking about it. You don't, see where you could go or where maybe you want to go or the different options that are available. You basically just see the limited focus in front of you of this is the pathway of the mission, and that's it. Right, so I made a rough map layout here that kind of will show you exactly where you're going in the District Union Arena. That way we can all kind of see together what's not there. What options could be available? Where could we go if, let's say they actually decided to put some real effort into revamping submissions. So let's get into it here. I was going to color code this a little bit better, but it just kind of got a little bit annoying. We'll see like the green, purple, blue, and teal over here. Those are like the elevation changes, or basically how you go from one level to the next. So like green to green, blue to blue, purple to purple, teal to teal. The red is obviously the final boss area, and this orange here, that's basically just the starting area. So if you're familiar with the District Union Arena, most of us should be. Obviously, you generally start over here. You can actually start over here too if you really wanted to, but general pathing, you end up going through here, fighting through the hordes of the hyenas, or sometimes you get the the Black Tusk helicopter that's with the chungas. They drop off like right here. Anyway, so you continue through the Sierra containers, and you basically end up fighting through the concourse here. You get to this doorway, you got the minigun here. So you keep fighting through that way, and then you end up getting to the stairs. Most of us should be familiar with the stairs. Once you get to the top of the stairs, if you're on Legendary, that's where you get the Warhounds and stuff like that in this room. You continue fighting through. There's like an armory style room. I believe it's like a restaurant or something like that in the actual, I guess, setting of the arena. But you fight through that. You end up getting through to the power room. If that's the room where like the hyena like whacks the control panel over here, you have to hit the power and everything. And then you go through the the tunnel of mattresses. Yeah, it's like the hallway where there's all those like disgustingly dirty just mattresses stacked up in like the back rooms and stuff like that. There's no enemies ever in there, but it leads to like another doorway where you fight through this like restaurant or something like that. Usually you got like the little like countertops or something like that, like right there, and then you got like another room like right here, and you got like the enemies that come out of here. Anyway, so you fight through this one, and then you end up getting into the whole it's like a bar area, kind of like arcade area. I think this is where like the hyena sleeps, if you're familiar with that in the story mode. It's like the hyena sleeping on the couch. Anyway, you fight through there, you get to the back room, and this room here is actually where you've got like it's like almost like an office space back there, and it's got like a bunch of different style like couches and tables and sofas all sitting up in here, stuff like that, right? Anyway, so you fight through that room, and you get to this basically like back alley stairwell. When you go down the stairwell, you end up actually going out to street level again. I guess I should clarify, this is the first floor. This one right here, this is the second floor, and then this one right here is the event floor. So it's not the basement, but it's lower than right here. Anyway, so if you're familiar with this area, if you've actually looked at this spot right here, there's basically just like a wall of trash, right? And then you've got the trash all over here, and you've got like a Sierra container that leads you out of there. You go through here, and then bam, you're in the it's like a mall courtyard. You got like the cinema up here, you got like a restaurant over here, and you've got like an event entrance area over here. So this spot right here is actually kind of like a ticket purchasing area for the actual arena. So it's an entrance for the arena. If you look here, you've got like a little hallway that actually leads back into the arena. Anyway, so you fight through this battle right here. That's like the first boss in just the normal DUA mission, right? Then once you complete it, there's like a little back room here that leads to an elevator shaft. You drop down the elevator shaft, and you end up in the event level. This is basically where you park, or where you pop out, and you're in the storage area. This is kind of like where you have a bunch of just random metal shelving and boxes and crates and stuff like that all through here. If you're just playing through on normal, there's nothing there. If you're doing legendary, you'll have like a bunch of Black Tusk hanging out in here. This then leads into like another little hallway, which leads into like almost like an automotive office space area. There's a couple computers, and that's basically just the waiting point for your group before you actually enter or open up the doorway and enter the garage here. And that's where, Diesel has his little turret truck set up blow up the truck, and he comes out, and then you take him down. After you do that, obviously you go through, you got the grow room. That's pretty much the best way to describe it. And it's pretty much, there's no real point to it. But then you just, team up right here, open up the doorway, and then you have the HVAC room where you need to like turn on the HVAC because there's too many, chemicals or smoke or something in there that's messing you up. It's disorienting you. And if you're familiar with Legendary, again, this is where the Chungas come out. Once you defeat the Chungas, you just go down the hallway, you go through the doorway, and it's like a locker room type thing, and then you go through the entrance for the arena, and bam, this is where you fight the boss at. All right. So you fight the boss in here, and then if you're actually one of the players that just teleports out immediately, you probably never see this. But if you're one of the people that actually follows the waypoint out of District Union Arena, you end up going back through here, and down here there's now an elevator that is opened up. That elevator then leads up to here, where you basically just follow a little hallway right back to the basically entrance of the District Union Arena. So that's pretty much the entire setup of the map. Now, it's not overly complicated. There's not, nothing really changes. It's this same path over and over and over again. You start on the first floor, you end up going to the second floor, you drop down to the first floor again, then you drop down to the event arena or event floor, and then basically you just come out of the entrance. That's it. This is, for all intents and purposes, a prime example of what could be done to improve a lot of the missions. I mean, if you don't really think about what's there and what's not there, I mean, you look at it and it's like, oh wow, there's a lot of area covered in this, mission. But that doesn't highlight any of the actual problems or other things that aren't really covered. I mean, we enter this building here, for example. This is where like the cinema is at. Like I already said, this is where that mall like lobby is at. But this whole building, what else is there? Could there be other areas that we could go into? Could they expand it? Yes. We know that obviously this is an arena, so there is the full possibility that there is other stuff all along through here. So there's the complete ability to have another encounter, another enemy, another boss, whatever. Again, you've got this whole corner over here, which has a lot of space that could be used for stuff. And you have this entire area over here that could be used for stuff. You jump to the event floor. You've got, again, all this area, all this area, all this area that can be used to house different things. And there's a little bit up here on the second floor that's not quite covered, but I don't really think it's that important. It's a little bit. Obviously, they could make a hallway that connects for what I'm talking about. So, given these basic outlines, right? Wouldn't it be great if there was a mission, for example, that allowed you to actually go in and have a different pathway? So maybe one time you run it, you go like the normal pathway. Or let's say, for the story mode, for the basic, getting through this mission for the first time, or for just, regular hard mode or regular challenge mode, it's the same mission all the time. And that'd be fine. I wouldn't have a problem with it. But what I'm saying is, why can't they create a different mode that kind of utilizes some of the features that we learned about with, Summit or with Countdown, or for example, the soon coming Descent mode, or even going back to Division 1, looking at Underground, right? If you look at it, those were giving you randomly generated areas each time you played through. And while the modes themselves were pretty lackluster, I think that they could have done a much better job. And this could be that better thing. They already have all these tile sets, right? These rooms are connected to each other. They could easily create a new mission, or not a new mission, but fill it out, right? So let's say they make a room here, they make a room here, they make a room here. Well, now instead of having the, only time you play through this mission, all you do is you go through this pathway. Well, maybe one time you play it, you go through this way. Maybe another time you play it, you end up going down here and actually going through like a newly created hallway that connects all this stuff. So your second time playing through it, you end up going through a completely different way to get to the stairwell. Or, who knows, maybe they put in another stairwell down here. That would be cool, wouldn't it? I mean, like, having the ability for them to actually, like, create multiple different ways where you can now go and basically get to other areas without having to, like, play through the same areas over again. So all I'm saying is they could create as many pathways as they wanted, right? This is exactly what we're looking at. You follow one thing to another, to another, to another, and that's it. But we know, again, this is an arena. You can enter the arena from over here and, walk all the way over here and get through this way. I mean, it's possible. You could technically do that. I don't know if they would want to, but you could. They don't need to have the same boss fight in the center all the time. That doesn't need to be the big bad boss fight. This doesn't even cover, some of the other stuff that they could do. Like, for example, District Union Arena isn't 3 floors. It's not, the first floor, the second floor, and the event floor. It has parking structure below it. So there's like 2 parking levels below this arena. It has a rooftop. And obviously, if you're familiar with Division 1, when we did the Madison Square, yeah, there's the rooftop battle at the end. But again, there's also, the 3rd floor and the 4th floor. Or I guess, they're not exactly huge on space, because obviously the higher, you go up in an arena, the smaller and smaller, like, the whole hallway gets, obviously. That's kind of what I, show here. Like this, on the event floor, obviously you've got a lot more space, but then once you get to the actual, first floor, your space starts to shrink, and then the, second floor, it's, a lot smaller. The 3rd floor and the 4th floor are obviously going to be, smaller still. So yeah, I don't necessarily think that there's going to be huge battles taking place on those floors, but there might be, like 1 or 2 spots maybe that they're, like accessible to having a, like a good fight or something like that. Or it's just, a hallway that leads you to a different pathway. That would be great too. I mean, it doesn't need to have a fight. It can just be a pathway to get you to a different spot in the map without feeling repetitive, right? Again, going to the rooftop, having a completely different battle up there. There are so many things that could be done with missions, and we've seen them do this. We've seen them do this with the Manhunt missions, where they change the pathing on the mission, you cut through a new way, and you're fighting something, right? I mean, it's not as, cut and dry as that, because that's obviously just a single thing that they changed, and that's it. But this still can be done. I mean, look, we have the random generation from Summit, which is, I mean, while I don't really think it's great, it could easily be converted into a, I guess, doorway generator. So imagine that, all of the doorways in the District Union Arena are closed. But when you go in, randomly 1 doorway will open. So after you clear through the fight, one of the doorways is going to open. It's going to signal you to go through that doorway. So you go through that doorway. And then once you clear that fight, another doorway is going to open up. And this could lead to, different hallways, different rooms, different stairwells, different elevators, all sorts of things, making a path that is random or, more interesting, more fun every time you actually go through it. Now, I know one of the biggest problems with this is something that they've talked about before, and that's when they're doing missions, they want players to be familiar with them. They want the mission to constantly be the same every single time. And this is kind of why they have like the leaderboards and stuff like that for, how fast you finished a mission. Well, yeah, I get it. If you randomly change this stuff and make it all, completely random, well, then how do you deal with leaderboards and stuff like that? And what I would say to that is, look, having the missions as they are for mission mode is fine, right? Just like, they've got the invaded missions, they've got the regular missions. Well, why can't they make, like a random mission mode where when you enter this mode, it's not tied to any of the leaderboards or any of that stupid garbage that doesn't really have a point in this game. But they have a different mode that is selectable. So you could select regular mission to get on your regular mission leaderboards. You could select the invaded mission to get on the invaded mission leaderboards or whatever the heck. And then you could have the random generation mission mode that gives you access to all of this. So you could play it on whatever difficulty you wanted. You could do it on legendary, you could do it on, heroic, you could do it on normal. I mean, I guess if they really wanted to, do that, I think probably heroic and legendary would be the main focus of this kind of mode. But, whatever they wanted to do. I don't see it as a problem. Why can't they create this unique pathing system? Why can't they create some sort of, randomly generated path with randomly generated bosses with, different encounters, maybe even some random objectives? Like, obviously, when you're running through a mission, we all know that it's the same old every single time you do it. But like in Summit, you go into a office area or mission area, whatever, and then it gives you the objective that you need to hack the computer, or the objective that you need to do this. Well, what happens if while you're in the District Union Arena, messages pop up like, okay, you need to free the hostage from this location, or you need to destroy the ammunition stash from this location, or hack the computers from this location, or, again, turn on the power at this location. All those random things could be pop-ups in a mission. So not only could there be just random objectives in the mission and random kind of pathing for different areas of the arena, but I mean, there could be random bosses, new unique encounters. Maybe there's, increased likelihood of rogue encounters, or maybe they even have hunter encounters, or who knows, maybe there's the chance that another faction could, attack the same place we're attacking. So, now it's like two factions versus each other with us, so I mean, like, there's all sorts of cool things that they could do that are kind of reminiscent of what Summit did. And I would just say that, Summit, the problem with Summit was that it was just boring. Like you go through it, and after, like the first couple levels that you do, like the first time you play through it, right? You do about like 5-10 levels, and then you start seeing the exact same setup over and over and over again. And you're like, this isn't fun. And then you realize, like the maps just kind of don't feel good. They don't feel fun. They don't feel unique. It doesn't feel very interesting. And yeah, I mean, look, I wasn't a fan of Summit. It wasn't as good as it should be. They didn't put as much effort as I think they should have. And it kind of hit like Underground, except less developed. I mean, Underground at least had, I feel like Underground had a lot more variation in its tile sets and a little bit more depth to it. Whereas, yeah, Summit just kind of felt very, very boring. I mean, people complained that Underground was rather like dull looking and just, plain. I mean, if you look at Summit, it's even worse. There's literally nothing to see there. It's very bad. So putting the Summit like procedures, right? Putting the Summit like random generation to some degree inside of missions that have been opened up and fully kind of like excavated so that there's actually fullness to their internal level. Putting this randomness there gives you access to so many different design structures, right? I mean, you don't just have one single tile set for all of Summit, 100 floors of the same exact tile set. You have access to every mission's unique tile set, so that every mission feels like itself, right? I mean, every building in the game feels a little bit different than the other buildings. I mean, not all of the stuff is super unique, but for the most part, the layout, the way that it's designed, a lot of the background stuff, that's all different from mission to mission. And then if you take every mission and give it a little bit extra area, make a little bit of a different pathing, increase the actual explorable areas, increase, the amount of like basement subsurface areas that you can go through, or just add in additional rooms or whatever. I mean, look, there's so many options for this stuff. I mean, I haven't pathed every single mission in the game, but I imagine, there's plenty of levels that aren't explored. Like it's not like you go through every single floor in every single mission that you do. And this gives you the ability to go through multiple different levels. This could give you the ability to, go up, down, or all the way to the roof and then all the way back down. Or, fight along the street, on the outside of the building before you go back in. There's so many ways that they could manipulate this to make missions just so much better. And again, they could keep the regular, 1 to 30 progression, 30 to 40, all that stuff the same, so that you run those missions and they're the same every time you do it. You could keep it so that, if you're running it on hard or challenging mode, it's the same time every time you do it. They could just make a completely different mode for the missions, right? Like you toggle invaded, like you toggle normal, you just toggle random, right? You toggle the random mission mode, and then it generates extra rooms, and it generates, different pathing, generates different enemies, different objectives, different bosses, all sorts of good things to do. And look, I understand that a lot of people would be like, well, it's a waste of time, nobody cares. But here's the thing. Missions are one of the, the biggest aspects of the game. People play the missions a lot. People play the missions 4 years after this game is launched. People test their builds on the missions. People do so much stuff inside of the missions, and they still play them. Again, 4 years of the same missions, people still play them. And I think that really speaks to what the game needs. It's obvious that the game doesn't need different modes that players kind of lose interest in. It's obvious that the game doesn't need seasons with a tiny little trickle of update, right? I mean, yeah, putting a new name on the same bad guy for a bounty doesn't feel good. So yeah, I think if they actually focused on missions and improving the base features of them, it would have a lot more impact on the game as a whole. It would have a lot more positive benefits for the players and for an expanding community. It would be a sign that the Division is actually trying to move forward with good design to actually, keep players engaged in the game, to keep players interested. And I mean, think about this. Summit, yeah, great. It's the same tile set for 100 floors. But you've got, at this point, what do we have? Close to like 15 missions, I think, something like that. Now you have 15 missions that are all completely random and different from each other. Like they're not the same anymore. You could run through each mission 20 times and never have the same pathway, never have the same bosses, never have the same objectives or anything. And so each time you run through it, it's completely different. And then you got that same experience over and over and over and over again every time you run through a mission. There might be missions right now that players just don't like to run. They don't like them. They don't like the layout. They don't like the feel of the mission. It's boring to them. It's not fun. But now all of a sudden you start randomizing it. You start making it, multiple pathed. You start making it, new different enemies. And this can happen every time you play through it. Now you've just got so many different pieces of content that you can go back and enjoy and play. And that's huge for the game. That's what players want. I mean, yeah, it's great to have new missions, but look at it like this. If they added just a regular new mission, what's going to happen to that mission in, like a month or two? People are going to play it, 4, 5, 6 times, and that's going to be it. Like, it's going to be like, okay, great. They added a new mission that I don't play anymore. But if that new mission just instantly started with random pathing, with, random bosses, with random objectives, the lifespan of that mission just, increased dramatically. And then you throw it into this framework of all these missions that have expanded areas, expanded pathing, just random generation. You've got basically a whole new end game. And of course, you could do all sorts of like secrets in there. So if you, do this correct thing, or, maybe like there's a hidden doorway that you can open up and you can get like access to like a whole new area that you normally wouldn't have access to. And, I'm thinking of like Destiny 2 kind of thing, or Destiny 1, the Black Spindle mission where you end up going through like a secondary hallway and, fighting the one fallen boss. And then you get one of the best sniper rifles in Destiny 1. That was cool. I wish, Division would implement something like that. But anyway, like the possibilities for what they could do to improve missions, it's huge. So I really think that this is something that the game needs. I mean, this is something that I look back and look at, Division 1, and I think, they had so much like explorable area in that game, and half of the buildings were completely empty. There was nothing there. Like 90% of the rooftops you never have access to. There was no point for them to even exist. I mean, you look at a lot of the missions, and They had some really cool pathways. Some of them you actually fought through the actual streets of the game. And then you look at Division 2, and it's literally like you enter this building, you run around this little obstacle course, and that's it. And I mean, the best way I can think about it is, like, let's picture two different games. Let's say one game is NASCAR and the other one is Mario Kart. Which game do you think sells more copies? Which game do you think is more successful? Oh, I can honestly tell you that Mario Kart is one of the most successful racing franchises of video game history. Like, it's huge, okay? It just is. It is super successful. But why do people want to play Mario Kart? It's because there's different pathing options. There's, different, areas where you can cut through, the racetrack. There's obviously multiple paths on the racetrack, and there's the power-ups, and then there's the racing itself. And, the wonderfully crafted world around that you're driving through, right? What are you doing in NASCAR? You're driving around the same little, like, circle over and over and over again. And most people don't want to do that. Like, it might be fun as kind of like something to do, like, oh yeah, I'm pretending to be a NASCAR driver and I'm driving in the circle, and like 10 minutes into it you're like, oh my god, I'm still driving in this circle. There's a reason that does not make huge amounts of money in the video game world. All right, there's a reason why Mario Kart is much more successful. And what I'm saying is that, yeah, division missions do get a lot of playtime, but imagine having these missions actually playing more like Mario Kart rather than playing like NASCAR, right? Because that's what they're doing. You go through the same pathway, you end up at the same ending point over and over and over again. You do the same stuff over and over and over again. Whereas in Mario Kart, things change, things happen. You can go this way, or you can miss the turn and go that way, or you could time your mushroom perfectly and manage to get into this little secret tunnel or something like that. And that's just one of the reasons why it works, because it does have so many options to it. It's unique, it's good, it's fun. Whereas a video game NASCAR doesn't really drive home the same thrill. It's not as great. I mean, yeah, some of them can be successful. I mean, like, I think there was like a Gran Turismo for the PlayStation 2 back in the day that had like a NASCAR-like race mode where I was just like endurance mode or something like that. And yeah, I played it a little bit, but I definitely didn't play Gran Turismo for that mode. I didn't want to do that, for very long. Like, I think the longest time I actually managed to play it was like an hour or something like that. But yeah, I mean, you don't play for 5-hour long races, right? That's just the way that it works for most people. And unfortunately, that's the division style of missions, having the same start point, the same end point over and over and over again, and never changing anything. And that hurts the game. That hurts the diversity in the game. That hurts the end game. It kind of dictates what players are actually wanting to do. And yeah, like funneling that's kind of the problem. They funnel everyone into like Summit or Countdown, or they're going to be funneling people into Descent because they're like, well, this is a fresh new experience where things are random and things are, changing. Well, why? Like, why did you have to do that? I mean, look, here's the argument for that. They have the missions that are standard based, bare bones, whatever. And then they gave players the option. So look, the problem that I see is kind of like this. They added Summit and Countdown, and I guess kind of like the new mode that they're adding, Descent. They added it to give players a new, fresh experience. They added it because the missions are bare bones. Like, it's the same old thing that you do every time. And so they added this random generation stuff, just like they did with Underground, that is supposed to be a new, fresh experience and kind of keep players engaged for a long period of time. But here is the biggest issue. They're never accomplishing what they say they're going to accomplish. They don't feel new. They don't feel fresh. They don't feel like they're reinvigorating anything. You look at Summit, you look at Underground, you play it for, an hour, and you've basically seen everything, and you've gotten to the point where this is boring and stale because they don't really put the effort and, I guess, desire of the fan base into those modes. They're fairly drab, they're fairly boring, they're repetitive. I mean, it feels like it's the same thing that's going on forever. Every time you do it, it's the same thing over and over again. And that's kind of just, it's basically just like adding a single mission to the game, because it does feel so similar to everything else that you do in that mode. Yes, no two runs of Underground may be the same, or no two, runs of Summit may be the same, but it feels exactly the same because you're using the exact same pieces over and over again. And they and a lot of you may be like, well, isn't that what you're saying that they should do? Just reuse the same pieces with the missions. And what I'm saying is, like, it's a little bit different with this situation. And what I'm saying is, going through the trouble to create random generation from a whole new starting point. So they had to go through, create this whole new mode, create all of the procedures and everything that's going to happen in this mode, create all of the various different entrances and connections, and make sure they line up all the time, every time, constantly. A lot of work went into that. And it's basically the equivalent of adding a single mission. But the work is much more than adding one single mission. Like, it might take a team of developers maybe a month to make a good quality mission. However, I don't think Underground or Summit or any of that stuff took a month. I think those took a substantially large amount of time to get everything right. Now, when you start with this process, like, let's say, rehabilitating an old mission and making it fresh and good, you've already got all the all the base starting points. So you have pretty much 90% of the map already there. All you need to do is add some new hallways, maybe a couple different rooms that you didn't, fully flesh out the first time you did it. And that's pretty much it, right? So, like, you can go through, and yeah, you have to probably change a little bit of the enemy's trigger points or the enemy's pathing. Yeah, you might have to add in some new doors or some new spawn points, but the base of the level is still there. All of the stuff is still there, and you can change it around as you want. Like, you can always come back and go through and take out things or add things to these missions, which would be great, and that would sustain the game even longer because they're constantly making minor changes that make everything, constantly feel fresh. But when you're doing a complete new mode, you have to rebuild all this stuff from scratch. You have to do all this stuff from scratch. You have to make all the assets from scratch, or steal them from something else that kind of looks vaguely similar, whatever. But when you're working with the missions, you already have it all, right? So you're just opening up doors that weren't there. Or maybe, in the worst case, sometimes I see in video games where, like, you can see both sides of the wall. On one side, there's a doorway that should be leading to the other wall. But then when you go to that back side, there's no doorway there. It's just a wall. It's like they put in the doorway just for decoration on one side, and there's nothing on the back side. But for a video game developer, putting in a freaking doorway isn't very difficult. Okay, so let's not say, like, oh my god, that's gonna break the game. They're gonna, maybe it's Division, so who knows. But putting in a doorway isn't a hugely complicated thing for the team. So I think it would be a great, I don't know, guys. I just think that there's so many excuses for stuff that they do, and they put in, like, all this garbage when really they need to do the simplest things. They need to do the most basic things. Revamping the game, adding things that are more fun and more unique. Not giving us random garbage that doesn't fit into the core experience of why people actually play the game. Again, this is like a Diablo shooter, or, like an MMO shooter kind of thing. Although it's not really MMO in my opinion, but that's really at its, core. It is a dungeon crawler shooter game. And what do players do? They go through the missions over and over again, farming gear and, taking out the bad guys. Well, Division just kind of ignores everything that players play it for, and just kind of constantly adds, like, random gimmicks to it that don't feel like they're connected to the game. They feel like they're just, other side things to do, and it doesn't feel good to the core audience, I think. At least not for long. Some people may like it when it comes out, but then quickly fade off and go back to doing the same thing that they've always been doing. So yeah, I think that a mission revamp in line with what I've been talking about, adding some new levels, adding some new rooms, interconnecting them with new hallways and new doorways, making random bosses appear, just adding new objectives or new mechanics to these missions, and making it a selectable mode that so they can keep their missions the way that they want, right? They wanted to have missions as a steady state, kind of like this is always what's going to happen. But at the same time, it needs to have something that players can actually dive into and dig their teeth in. Something that's going to be different and unique and fun, and not exactly what's going to be expected every single freaking time they run a mission. That's it's kind of like, well, we think players only want to play missions for just this exact experience every single time. And it's not true. You've got this great asset that you could reuse in a profoundly different way and make it better. I think they should take advantage of that. And I think, if they did, it would be a really smart choice. But, we'll see. Maybe they just like to keep wasting their time with adding random stuff that the players didn't ask for. In the case of Descent mode, I mean, look, they added things like Countdown and they added Summit, and they haven't really ever gone back and improved or revamped those things in a meaningful way. I mean, look, we still don't have like windows in Summit, which is one of the I mean, it sounds silly. Like, why aren't there windows in Summit? It's like, do we need windows? But you play it a couple times and you're just like, why can't I look outside? Like, why can't there be sunlight in here? This place is so just dull and boring, and I don't want to do it anymore. But yeah, I mean, there's plenty of gameplay that they could flesh out from other things already in the game and make it fun, but they just don't. So yeah, hopefully, if there is going to be a 6th year, I mean, I'm honestly on the fence. I would like for it to happen if they actually, make good strides and continue to improve the game. I would love for there to be a year 6 if they really show us what they can do. But, as of right now, if they're just going to continue on this kind of pathway where it's just like meh, yeah, I'd rather them just stop. But that's just me, guys. Anyway, thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next one.